Ladies, before we even begin today's story, let me send a warm shout-out to two incredible women who have been lighting up our comments section. Sophia Reynolds from Denver and Hannah Mitchell from San Diego. Your messages don't just sit under the videos, they shine. It's women like you who turn these stories into something alive, something shared, something that travels further than we ever expect. And now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. We love discovering all the places our stories reach. But let me warn you, the ending of today's story, it's the kind of twist that makes your heart skip a beat, and YouTube only unlocks that final moment for subscribers. If you're not subscribed, the story stops before the truth hits. And trust me, that truth hits hard. So subscribe now, drop a like, share your city, and brace yourself, because this ending doesn't just surprise, it shakes you. Subscribe now, because what you're about to read will prove that kindness is the most powerful force in the universe. A billionaire tech CEO secretly battling a devastating disease that's stealing his ability to even hold a fork. A struggling waitress working 3 jobs just to survive. And one simple act of compassion in a small restaurant that will lead to a love story so unexpected, so beautiful. It will restore your faith that true connection transcends wealth, status, and every barrier life throws in our way. This story has twists that will shock you, and an ending so perfect you'll believe in destiny again. Don't miss a single word. Early autumn in Chicago brought a cool breeze that painted leaves in Lincoln Park gold and red. Cameron Mitchell sat at the window of a small restaurant called Under the Maples, located on the edge of the park. From this vantage point, he could observe people walking by, taking advantage of the last rays of beautiful September sunshine before the cold months arrived. Cameron was 36 years old and one of the richest men in America. His technology company, Nova Vision, had revolutionized the medical software market in the United States and was now expanding operations throughout North America and Europe. Despite his young age and enormous financial success, Cameron felt lonely. The cold walls of his penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago didn't replace the warmth missing from his life. 3 months ago, everything had changed. During a routine medical examination, doctors diagnosed him with multiple sclerosis. The disease was progressing faster than specialists expected. Within a few weeks, Cameron began experiencing numbness in his hands and problems with movement coordination. Today was especially difficult. His hands shook so badly he couldn't hold cutlery. He'd come to Under the Maples because it was a place that always reminded him of his childhood. His mother, before she died 10 years ago, often brought him here for traditional comfort food dinners. The restaurant hadn't changed much since then. The same wooden tables, the same fresh smell of baked bread, and slow-cooked pot roast. Cameron tried to hide his frustration when he dropped his fork for the 3rd time, trying to spear a piece of pork chop. He cursed quietly under his breath, glancing around discreetly to see if anyone had noticed his clumsiness. He'd always been a perfectionist, but now he couldn't perform the simplest task, eating alone. "Can I help you with something?" he heard a gentle voice. He looked up and saw a young waitress. She was maybe 25 years old, with light brown hair tied in a messy bun and a warm smile that didn't seem forced. Her name tag read, Patricia. "No, thank you, everything's fine," he replied automatically, though it was obvious he was lying. Patricia Walker had been working at Under the Maples for 3 years. After graduating with a degree in art history, she couldn't find work in her field, so waiting tables became her way to pay rent for the tiny apartment in Logan Square that she shared with a friend. She liked her job. She met different people, and the restaurant owners, an elderly couple named the Andersons, treated her almost like a daughter. Patricia had noticed the elegant man sitting by the window the moment he entered. There was something in his eyes, a deep sadness he tried to hide behind a mask of confidence. She'd watched discreetly as he struggled with his meal, how his hands trembled as he tried to lift his water glass. She couldn't watch his frustration any longer. "Please, let me help," she said quietly, sitting in the empty chair across from him. "Sometimes we all need a hand." Before Cameron could protest, Patricia gently took his knife and fork, efficiently cut the pork chop into small pieces, and moved the plate closer to him. "Now it should be easier," she smiled, standing up. "If you need anything else, just let me know." Cameron felt warmth spreading across his cheeks. He was used to people treating him, with respect because of his position and wealth. He couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him selfless help without knowing who he was. "Thank you," he said quietly, trying to hide his emotion. "That was very kind." Patricia nodded and returned to serving other guests. Cameron found himself eating the rest of his meal while watching her out of the corner of his eye. She was different from the women he usually met. Businesswomen, models, daughters of influential families. Nothing in her gestures was calculated, only natural kindness. When he finished eating, he asked for the check, left a tip worth twice the value of the order, and wrote on a napkin, "Thank you for your humanity, CM." Before leaving, he glanced toward Patricia again. She was talking to an elderly couple at another table, laughing heartily. The next day, Cameron returned to Under the Maples. He didn't know why. He had a private chef who could prepare any dish he wanted. He had an assistant who could feed him if needed. But something pulled him back to this unassuming restaurant on the edge of the park. Patricia recognized him immediately. This time she greeted him with a smile as if he were a regular customer, not someone she'd just met yesterday. "Good morning. Same as yesterday?" she asked, handing him a menu. "Yes, please," he replied without even looking at the menu. "And if it's not too much trouble, could you—" "Of course," she interrupted, understanding without words. "There's nothing wrong with needing help sometimes." While Patricia was cutting his pork chop, Cameron asked, "What makes you so kind to strangers?" Patricia thought for a moment. "My grandmother always said, 'Treat others as you'd like to be treated.' It sounds trivial, but there's deep wisdom in it." She smiled. "Besides, none of us knows what tomorrow will bring. Today I'm helping you. Tomorrow someone else will help me." Cameron introduced himself, stretching out his hand. She noticed it was shaking. Slightly. Patricia responded by shaking his hand. "Nice to officially meet you." Over the next week, Cameron came to Under the Maples every day, always sitting at the same table by the window. Sometimes he came for lunch, other times for a late afternoon meal. Every time, Patricia recognized him from afar, welcomed him with a warm smile, and discreetly helped him with his meal when needed. Slowly, between cutting meat and pouring tea, they started talking. Patricia told him about her art, history studies, about her dream of opening a small folk art gallery with the cozy feel of the galleries in Santa Fe she'd visited once. She talked about leaving her small hometown in Wisconsin to come to Chicago. Cameron listened, taking pleasure in the fact that someone treated him like an ordinary person, not like a billionaire or a patient. Patricia didn't know who Cameron really was. Seeing his elegant clothes and expensive watch, she guessed he was wealthy, but she didn't ask for details. She appreciated him for his intelligent humor, careful listening, and the respect with which he treated all restaurant employees, from the cook to the busboy. On Friday evening, when the restaurant was full of guests and Patricia was running between tables, Cameron watched her with admiration. Despite being tired, she had a smile and a kind word for everyone. When she finally found a moment to approach his table, he noticed she was limping slightly. "Everything okay?" he asked with concern. "Yes, it's nothing," she waved her hand. "Old injury from when I thought I'd become a prima ballerina. Reality quickly corrected those dreams." "It's never too late to dream," Cameron said quietly, thinking about his own life that, despite financial success, seemed empty. When the restaurant was nearly empty and the last guests were leaving, Cameron was still sitting at his table. Patricia, finishing her shift, came over to him. "We close in 20 minutes, she said with a smile. "I know. Sorry," Cameron replied. "I was wondering if would you mind showing me Chicago tomorrow? I've lived here for years, but I've always been too busy to really explore the city." Patricia looked at him, surprised. It flashed through her mind that this was a strange request from a customer. But there was nothing disturbing in Cameron's eyes, only honest interest and perhaps a little loneliness. "I'm off tomorrow," she said after a moment's thought. "I could show you some places you won't find in guidebooks." They agreed to meet at 10 a.m. under the Cloud Gate sculpture in Millennium Park. When Cameron left the restaurant, he felt a strange sensation, as if he'd started breathing deeply again after a long time. He didn't know that this meeting would change his life forever, that he would find something his money could never buy, an authentic bond with another person who saw Cameron in him, not a billionaire or a patient. Patricia, closing up the restaurant, didn't suspect that the elegant man with trembling hands was leading her orderly life toward challenges and opportunities she'd never dreamed she'd face, that she'd have to confront her own prejudices and fears, that she'd learn that helping others sometimes means letting them help you. Chicago's autumn took on more intense colors, and their stories were beginning to intertwine, creating a tale about how unexpected meetings can change the course of human life. Saturday morning greeted Chicago with a delicate fog floating over Lake Michigan. Cameron arrived at Cloudgate, the famous bean sculpture, 10 minutes before the scheduled time. He was dressed in casual clothes, navy blue sweater and khaki pants, a significant change from the business suits Patricia had seen him in until now. He was leaning on a cane, another element he hadn't shown before at the restaurant. Patricia appeared at exactly 10 o'clock, wearing a red coat and colorful scarf. At the sight of her, Cameron felt a strange flutter, a mixture of joy and uncertainty. For a moment he wondered if he'd made a mistake asking her for this meeting. She was, after all, a waitress who was just doing her job well, and he was a customer with a progressive disease. "Good morning," Patricia called as she approached with a smile. "I hope you didn't wait long." "I just got here," he lied, smiling back. Her gaze stopped for a moment on the cane, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, she said, "I thought we could start with places less obvious than the standard tourist route. How much can you walk, if you don't mind me asking?" The question was asked so naturally, without a hint of pity or embarrassment, that Cameron felt relieved. "I can manage. Today's a good day," he replied. Patricia nodded with understanding. "Then we'll start with the river walk. It has an amazing view of the architecture, and not many tourists venture to the quieter sections." They set off slowly through the streets of the Loop. Patricia adjusted her pace to Cameron's, but she did it so discreetly that he almost didn't notice. She told him about the history of the buildings they passed, legends related to the Chicago fire, about the city's rebuilding. Cameron listened, fascinated. Even though he'd lived in Chicago for over 10 years, he'd never delved into its history. He'd always been too busy building his technological empire. "How do you know all this?" he asked when they reached a viewpoint overlooking the Chicago River. Patricia leaned against the railing, gazing at the city skyline. "I studied art history, remember? But the truth is, I've always loved history. As a child, instead of fairy tales, I read books about old times, about pioneers and wars." "So why do you work as a waitress?" he asked before he could bite his tongue. "Sorry, that was a thoughtless question." Patricia looked at him without offense. "There's nothing thoughtless about it. I work there because I need to live on something, and the job market for art history experts isn't very kind." She smiled slightly. "But I like the work. I meet interesting people. For example, clumsy customers who can't hold their cutlery. For example," Cameron joked. "For example," she laughed. "But also elderly ladies who come every day just for tea with lemon, or businessmen discussing big deals over pot roast. Everyone has their own story." They spent almost half an hour on the Riverwalk, talking and admiring the city skyline. Then Patricia led him to a hidden courtyard in the Gold Coast neighborhood, where building walls were covered with murals depicting the city's jazz heritage. "This is one of my favorite places in Chicago," she said quietly. "It reminds me that this city has many layers, many stories hidden beneath the surface." Cameron looked at a mural depicting an elderly man playing trumpet. There was something moving in the image, dignity, despite difficult circumstances. "I have my layer beneath the surface too," he said suddenly, surprised by his own confession. Patricia looked at him questioningly but didn't push. Instead, she gently touched his arm. "Each of us has one," she replied. "Some just hide it better." Around noon, Patricia took him to a small cafe hidden on one of the side streets near Michigan Avenue. It was a cozy place with books filling shelves on the walls, and the fresh smell of ground coffee floating in the air. "This is my secret place when I need to escape the hustle and bustle," she confessed, as they took seats by the window. They ordered coffee and cheesecake, which Patricia said was the best in all of Chicago. Cameron, used to luxury restaurants and exquisite dishes, had to admit she was right. The simple cheesecake in this unassuming cafe tasted better than many fancy desserts he'd tried. "You don't ask," Cameron noted after they'd eaten. "Ask about what?" Patricia raised her eyebrows. "About my cane, my trembling hands, about what's wrong with me." Patricia put down her cup and looked him straight in the eyes. "I thought you'd tell me when you were ready." Everyone has a right to their secrets. Cameron felt something break inside him, the wall he'd built around himself since receiving the diagnosis. Without thinking, he started talking. I have multiple sclerosis. They diagnosed me 3 months ago. Doctors say it's progressing faster than usual. Sometimes, like today, I can walk with help from a cane. Other days I might not be able to get out of bed. I never know what the next day will bring. Patricia listened in silence, not interrupting. When he finished, she didn't offer standard platitudes about how it would be okay, how medicine works miracles. Instead, she asked, "Are you afraid?" The question, so simple and immediate, surprised him. Nobody, not doctors, not co-workers, not even he himself in his own thoughts, had asked him this directly. "Yes," he replied, feeling his voice tremble. "I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of losing control. My whole life I controlled everything. My company, my time, my surroundings. And now you need to learn to ask for help," Patricia finished. That might be the hardest lesson. Cameron felt tears come to his eyes. He looked away, ashamed of his weakness. "Sorry, I shouldn't have said all that," he said, trying to regain control over his emotions. "Why are you sorry? For being human?" Patricia gently touched his hand. "Each of us is fragile, Cameron. At least you have the courage to admit it." After leaving the cafe, they walked along State Street, now talking about lighter topics, about films they liked, books that moved them, places they'd like to visit. Cameron couldn't remember the last time he'd had such an ordinary conversation without business or medical overtones. When they reached the Chicago Cultural Center, Patricia showed him a hidden passage leading to one of the interior courtyards with a magnificent Tiffany dome. "Here's where I used to study," she said with a hint of nostalgia in her voice. "Sometimes I come here to remember those times. Life seemed full of possibilities then." "And it's not now?" Cameron asked. Patricia became lost in thought. "It's different, more complicated, but I still believe there are many good things ahead of me." Cameron thought about his life, about professional success, about money, about the empty apartment he returned to every evening, about diagnoses and prognoses that took away his future. Did he believe something good was waiting for him? "Were you always so optimistic?" he asked. "No," Patricia laughed. "I was a terrible pessimist in high school. My friend called me a dark cloud. But then," she hesitated, "then I realized that pessimism is a luxury for those who've never encountered real problems." "What happened?" Cameron asked quietly. "My father got cancer when I was 18. For 2 years he fought, and I watched how you have to be strong when everything's falling apart, how important hope is, even when it seems there's nothing left to count on." She smiled sadly. "He died just before my final exams, but he managed to teach me that even in the darkest hour, you can find light." Cameron didn't know what to say. His own problems suddenly seemed smaller compared to what this young woman had been through. And yet she still smiled, still helped others, still found joy in small things. They spent the rest of the day wandering around the city with no particular plan. Patricia showed him her favorite bookstores, a tiny bakery where the best croissants in the city were sold, and a square where on warm days street musicians gave concerts. Cameron, who until now had only known the business face of Chicago, luxurious restaurants, expensive hotels, and modern office buildings, discovered a completely different city, full of hidden treasures and authentic life. As the sun began to set, they sat on a bench in Lincoln Park, tired but happy. Cameron felt a slight pain in his legs after the long walk, but he didn't regret a single minute of that day. "Thank you for today," he said, looking at the pond where the golden light of the setting sun reflected. "I don't remember the last time I had so much fun." "Me too," Patricia replied. It was a nice change after long days spent between tables. A comfortable silence fell between them. Cameron wondered if he should tell her the truth about himself, about who he really was, about his company, about his wealth. But he was afraid this would change everything, that Patricia would start seeing him differently, that he'd lose this authenticity that attracted him so much. "What are you thinking about?" Patricia asked, interrupting his thoughts. "About how strange life is," he replied, not entirely lying. "If I hadn't dropped that fork in the restaurant, we probably would never have talked. Fate sometimes has a strange sense of humor," Patricia smiled. "But I'm glad you dropped that fork." When they were parting, Cameron felt both sadness and hope. sadness that this day was ending, and hope that there would be more days like this. "Could we do this again?" he asked as they stood at the bus stop, where Patricia was supposed to catch a bus to Logan Square. "With pleasure," she replied without hesitation. "But next time you choose the route." He smiled, already knowing where he'd like to take her. "See you at the restaurant?" she asked when her bus appeared on the horizon. "See you," he confirmed. "And thank you again, Patricia, for everything." When the bus left, Cameron stood for another moment at the bus stop, feeling different than he had that morning, as if something had thawed in him, as if light was beginning to penetrate through a crack in the wall with which he'd surrounded his heart. He knew his illness hadn't disappeared, that tomorrow might be worse, that the future was still uncertain. But for the first time since hearing the diagnosis, he felt that this future could be more than just fear and loneliness, that Patricia might be in it, with her warm smile and unbreakable optimism, with her strength that he so desperately needed. He returned to his apartment, which suddenly felt even emptier and colder than usual. But still in his thoughts rang Patricia's laughter and her words about how even in the darkest hour, you can find light. Continuing in next response due to length. Story approximately 35% complete. Remaining sections include Monday at Nova Vision headquarters, Patricia discovering Cameron's true identity. There a confrontation about the secret, the reconciliation conversation, 6 months later with gallery opening, proposal scene and epilogue, showing their life together with Cameron's disease progression, but their love strengthened. Monday morning at Nova Vision headquarters proceeded as usual. Employees moved between workstations, phones rang constantly, and meetings took place in conference rooms. But nothing was the same for Cameron. The weekend spent with Patricia had changed his perspective, as if, for years, he'd been looking at the world through grey glass that was suddenly removed, showing full colors. He sat in his office on the top floor of a modern building on Wacker Drive, reviewing documents prepared by his assistant Martha. Through the glass walls, he could see the panorama of Chicago, the same Chicago that Patricia had shown him, but from a completely different perspective. The city from above seemed distant, abstract. With Patricia, it had been tangible, full of scents, sounds, and history. "Mr. Mitchell, the board is waiting in the conference room," Martha said, entering with a tablet in hand. "And Dr. Anderson called. He postponed your appointment to Wednesday." Cameron nodded, getting up from behind his desk. He reached for the cane he now officially used in the office. After the weekend with Patricia, he'd decided he would no longer hide his illness from colleagues. To his surprise, most had accepted the news with understanding and support. "Martha," he stopped his assistant as she was leaving, "could you find information for me about small art galleries in Chicago, especially those specializing in folk art?" Martha looked at him surprised. In 5 years working for Cameron, she'd never had such an unusual request. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. Something specific?" "Startup costs, legal requirements, potential market," Cameron replied, thinking about Patricia's dream, "and maybe a few examples of successful ventures of this type. I'll address this after the board meeting," Martha replied, writing down the task. The board meeting was routine: quarterly results review, discussion of new products, competition analysis. Cameron ran it efficiently, but only part of his mind was there. The rest was still circling around Patricia. He wondered if she was at the restaurant now, if she had many customers, if her thoughts wandered to their shared day. After the meeting, instead of his usual lunch in the office cafeteria, Cameron decided to go to Under the Maples. He knew Patricia had the afternoon shift today. She'd mentioned it when they said goodbye. The restaurant was almost full when he entered. He looked around, searching for a familiar face, but Patricia was nowhere to be seen. Instead, another waitress he recognized from previous visits stood at the entrance. "Good afternoon. Table for one?" she asked with a professional smile. "Yes, thank you." "Is Patricia working today?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Patricia?" The waitress, frowned. Yes. She was supposed to be on the afternoon shift, but she called this morning saying she was sick. She took a sick day for the first time in 3 years. Can you imagine? Cameron felt a twinge of anxiety. Patricia hadn't looked sick when they'd parted Saturday. Had something happened? During lunch, he thought only of her, wondering if he should somehow contact her. But he realized he didn't even have her phone number. Their relationship, whatever it was, had been limited to chance. Encounters at the restaurant and one day spent together. He had no right to worry about her like someone close to him would. And yet, he worried. Back at the office, he couldn't concentrate on work. He caught himself several times reading the same email without understanding its content. At 4 p.m., Martha entered his office with a large folder. "Information about art galleries you asked about," she said, putting the documents on his desk. "I've also included market analysis of folk art in America and several examples of successful business plans." "Thank you, Martha. You're irreplaceable," Cameron replied, grateful for her efficiency. When he was alone, he began reviewing the documents. He read about legal requirements, costs of renting space in downtown areas, marketing strategies for artistic niches. With every page, an idea was taking shape. He could help Patricia make her dream come true. He had resources, contacts, business experience. He could invest in her gallery, be a silent partner, or even... He stopped, realizing how far his thoughts had gone. After all, he'd only known this woman for several days. What would she think if he suddenly offered to finance her dream? Wouldn't she consider it an attempt to buy her affection? Or worse, an act of pity from a rich man toward a waitress? He sighed, closing the folder. He had to tell her the truth first, about who Cameron Mitchell really was. The next day, Patricia returned to work. Cameron noticed her immediately when he entered the restaurant for lunch. She looked pale, as if she'd actually been fighting an infection, but she smiled warmly when she saw him. "Cameron, your table by the window is waiting," she greeted him. When she sat down to take his order, Patricia looked a bit uncomfortable, which wasn't typical of her. "Everything okay?" Cameron asked. "I heard you were sick yesterday." "Yes, a small cold," she replied quickly, glancing somewhere over his shoulder. "What can I get you?" "Same as usual," he replied, feeling something was wrong. "Patricia, if something happened—" "No, really, everything's fine," she interrupted. "I'll be right back with your order." When she left, Cameron felt confused. What could have caused such a change? Had he done something inappropriate on Saturday? Or maybe she'd said too much and now regretted her openness. His thoughts were interrupted by Patricia's appearance with a plate of pork chop. When she was setting it in front of Cameron, he noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Patricia," he said quietly, "if Saturday was a mistake, if you feel uncomfortable—" "It's not that," she interrupted, looking around to see if anyone was listening. "Cameron, why didn't you tell me who you are?" Cameron felt his heart speed up. "What do you mean?" "About being Cameron Mitchell, founder and CEO of Nova Vision, one of the richest men in America," she replied, looking straight into his eyes. "My roommate works in PR. Yesterday she showed me your photo in some business magazine, an article about the 30 most influential Americans under 40. Cameron felt blood drain from his face. This wasn't how he'd wanted this conversation to go. Not here, not now. "Patricia, why didn't you tell me?" There was no anger in her voice, rather confusion and slight hurt. "I was honest with you," he replied, feeling emotions constrict his throat. "In everything that matters, how much money I have doesn't define who I am." Patricia bit her lip, as if struggling with her own thoughts. "When you work as a waitress, you quickly learn to recognize types of people," she finally said. "Rich customers usually treat us either with condescension or exaggerated friendliness that masks their sense of superiority. You were different, real, and now I don't know if it was just a good act." "It wasn't an act," Cameron replied, feeling his heart pound. "I wanted you to get to know me. Not my wealth, not my company. Just me, Cameron, who drops his forks and needs help. Cutting his meat." Patricia was silent for a moment, processing his words. "So your illness is real too? Not part of some strange social experiment?" "Multiple sclerosis is as real as it gets," he replied, feeling a pang of pain that she might have doubted it. "And it's the one thing I really wouldn't want to have." Their conversation was interrupted by an elderly lady at the next table asking Patricia for the check. When the waitress left, Cameron sat motionless, feeling the newfound joy in his life slipping through his fingers. How could he have been so stupid? Of course, Patricia would eventually discover the truth. Chicago was too small a city for people of his position to remain anonymous. When Patricia came back, she did something she'd never done before during his lunch. She sat down across from him. "I'm on break now. she explained, seeing his surprise. "I think we should talk." Cameron nodded, not trusting his own voice. "Listen, Cameron," Patricia began, playing with a napkin. "I'm not angry that you're rich. That would be absurd. I'm confused. On Saturday, I told you about my dreams of a small gallery, about problems paying rent. And you could buy the entire building where I live, and it wouldn't even hurt you financially." "Money isn't everything, Patricia," he replied quietly. "I know," she said. "Believe me, I know better than most, but it changes the rules of the game." She looked him straight in the eyes. "There's now an imbalance between us that can't be ignored. And it's not just about money. You're the CEO of a major company, a famous person, and I'm just a waitress with an unfinished art history degree." "You were never just a waitress to me," Cameron interrupted, unable to keep the emotion out of his voice. "From day one, you were Patricia, the person who saw a human in me, not a billionaire or a patient, the person who made me feel something more than fear of the future." Patricia fell silent, clearly moved by his words. They sat in silence. For a while, each absorbed in their own thoughts. "I need to think this all over, Cameron," Patricia finally said. "This is a lot for me. One day you're just a nice customer with health problems, and the next it turns out you're on business magazine covers." "I understand," Cameron replied, feeling hope slip away with every word. "But I want you to know one thing, Patricia. Saturday was the happiest day I've had in years, and it had nothing to do with money or status. It was just a day I felt alive again." Patricia looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "For me, too, it was a beautiful day, Cameron. And that's what I'm so afraid of, that I'll ruin it all." She hesitated. "I need time to understand what this all means. For me, for us, if there even is an us." "How much time do you need?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. A few days." Patricia stood from the table. "I'll be here at work, but please don't come for a few days, okay? I need to collect my thoughts." Cameron nodded, feeling his chest tighten. "Of course. I understand." Patricia hesitated, as if she wanted to add something else, but in the end she just lightly touched his hand and went to the kitchen. Cameron sat motionless, looking at the uneaten pork chop that had suddenly lost all flavor. He left the restaurant, leaving much more than the meal cost on the table, but he knew no amount of money would fix what had just happened. Continuing in next response. Story approximately 65% complete. Remaining sections: Cameron's evening of reflection, Patricia's phone call, their apartment meeting, honest conversation about differences, 6 months later with gallery opening and proposal, epilogue. He returned to the office but couldn't focus on work. Everything seemed so empty now, so devoid of meaning. In the evening, sitting in his empty penthouse apartment, Cameron analyzed the last days. How was it possible that one person he'd met just a week ago had such influence on him? Had his disease made him this prone to emotions? Or maybe he'd always needed this, an authentic bond with another person, but had been too busy building an empire to notice. His thoughts were interrupted by his phone ringing. It was Martha, his assistant. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to call so late," she said, "but I think you should know. A woman called the office. She introduced herself as Patricia Walker. She was asking for your private phone number." Cameron felt his heart speed up. "What did you tell her?" "As per procedure, I didn't provide any private information," Martha replied. "But I wrote down her number. I thought you might want to call her back." Yes, of course," Cameron said, grabbing a pen. "Give me that number." When he'd written down Patricia's number, he thanked Martha and hung up. For a while he stared at the numbers on the paper, wondering what he should do. Should he call? Or was it too early? Shouldn't he give her the time she'd asked for? Finally, guided more by heart than wisdom, he dialed the number. The phone rang for a long time. Cameron was about to hang up when he heard her voice. "Hello?" Patricia said, sounding surprised. "It's me, Cameron," he replied, suddenly unsure what to say. "Martha told me you called." There was a moment of silence that seemed like an eternity. "Yes, I called," Patricia finally admitted. "I'm sorry I broke my own request for a few days to think, but the more I thought, the more I realized this wasn't the way we should solve this." "What do you mean?" Cameron asked, feeling his heart speed up. "I was sitting alone in my apartment, imagining scenarios of who you are and what you want from me," Patricia explained. "And I realized it's absurd. If we're going to get to know each other better, We should just talk to each other, openly and honestly. Cameron felt relief spread through his body. I completely agree. So let's talk. Right here, right now, on the phone. Patricia laughed softly, and that sound made Cameron smile too. I was thinking more about meeting in person. Can you come tomorrow? I can come today, he replied without hesitation. Right now. Another moment of silence. Then, my address is 2424 West Diversey, apartment 15, Logan Square. But I warn you, it's not the district I usually invite billionaires to. And how many billionaires have you invited? Cameron joked, feeling the tension of the last hours begin to ease. You'll be the first, she answered, and Cameron could almost hear her smile. So are you coming? Give me half an hour, he said, already looking for his car keys. Logan Square, one of Chicago's most authentic neighborhoods, was a district of contrasts. Historic buildings stood next to modern developments. Trendy cafes sprang up near traditional diners. Artists and hipsters mixed with long-time residents, creating a unique atmosphere. Cameron parked his Jaguar on Diversey Avenue, aware that the luxury car would attract attention from passers-by. The building where Patricia lived was an old but renovated brownstone from the early 20th century. The stairwell smelled of fresh paint, mixed with the aroma of cooked food. Patricia opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been waiting right next to it. She wore plain jeans and a gray sweater, no special outfit for meeting with a billionaire. Come in, she said, moving away from the door. The apartment's not big, but at least it's authentic, just like me. Cameron entered, looking around with interest. The apartment was indeed small. Kitchen connected to the living room, a door probably leading to the bedroom and bathroom. But it was cozy and full of character. Colorful pillows on the couch, walls lined with books, potted herbs on the windowsills, reproductions of folk art on the walls. It's nice here, he said honestly. It feels like your place. Patricia smiled slightly. Thank you. Tea, coffee, wine? Though you're probably used to better drinks than my $20 wine from Target. Tea would be perfect, Cameron replied, ignoring the self-deprecating comment. And Patricia, I want you to know, I really don't care about luxury. I never have. Patricia looked at him searchingly, then nodded and busied herself making tea. Cameron sat on the couch, watching her move around the small kitchen with certainty and efficiency, someone used to working in confined spaces. So, she said, handing him a cup of tea and sitting on the other end of the couch, where do we start? Maybe with questions, Cameron suggested. I'm sure you have many. Yes, Patricia admitted, turning her mug in her hands. First, why me? Why, of all the people you meet every day, did you become interested in an ordinary waitress? Cameron thought for a while, searching for the right words. You're not ordinary, Patricia. You're the most extraordinary person I've met in years, he finally said, looking straight into her eyes. You see, in my world, people always want something from me. Money, contracts, investments, endorsements, status by association. You were the first person in a very long time who offered me something without expecting anything in return. You helped me with my meal not because I'm Cameron Mitchell, CEO of Nova Vision, but because I was a man who needed help. That awakened something in me. Patricia listened carefully. Her expression softened with every word. And now my question, Cameron continued. Why did you agree to spend Saturday with me? You didn't know who I was then. Patricia smiled slightly. Because I saw loneliness in your eyes, she replied directly. The same loneliness I sometimes see in my mirror. And I thought maybe two lonely people could be a little less lonely for one day. Those words hit Cameron straight in the heart. For so long he'd pretended to the world, to himself, that he had everything under control, that he didn't miss anything. And this woman, knowing him just a few days, had seen what he'd hidden deepest. One more question, Patricia added before he could respond. What now? What do you expect from this? She made a gesture between them. From us? This was the hardest question. Cameron didn't know what he wanted, what he could expect. He had an incurable disease. He ran a multi-billion-dollar company. He lived in a world so distant from her reality. And yet, I want to get to know you, Patricia, he said honestly. Really know you. No masks, no pretense, no hiding anything. I don't know where. This will lead us. My situation is complicated. But I know one thing. When I'm with you, I feel like Cameron. Not a CEO, not a patient, not a billionaire. Just a man. And that's the most valuable gift anyone has given me. Patricia put her mug on the table and moved closer to him on the couch. What if this doesn't work? She asked quietly. What if our worlds are too different? Then we'll know we at least tried, Cameron replied, gently taking her hand. That we didn't let fear of differences take away our chance for something special. Patricia looked at their intertwined hands, then straight into his eyes. So let's try, she said with a smile that lit up her face. Without hiding who we are. You're Cameron Mitchell, billionaire with a progressive disease. I'm Patricia Walker, waitress with unfulfilled dreams of an art gallery. And we'll see if we can find common ground despite these differences. We already found it, Cameron replied. We both love autumn in Chicago, cheesecake, at that little cafe on State Street, and conversations about books no one else reads. Patricia laughed, and Cameron thought it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Now that we've agreed to try this, Cameron said, I have a proposal. Will you let me show you my world, the way you showed me yours? Patricia hesitated only for a moment. Provided I can go back to mine if I don't like yours, she replied with a mischievous glint in her eye. Of course, Cameron agreed, though I warn. There's no cheesecake as good as ours. 6 months later, Patricia stood in front of a large mirror in the newly renovated space on Dearborn Street in Chicago's River North neighborhood. Colorful Roots, that's what she'd named her folk art gallery, which would open in 3 days. The first exhibits were already hanging on the walls. Quilts from Appalachia, wood carvings, ceramics from various American regions. The investor was, of course, Cameron, but on her terms, as a silent partner who provided initial capital but left her full artistic and daily management control. Patricia had worked on this project over the last few months, traveling throughout the Midwest, meeting with folk artists, selecting the best works. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. It was Cameron, now moving with crutches. The disease had progressed as doctors predicted, but his smile when he saw Patricia standing among the colorful exhibits was as radiant as the day they'd met. How is it? She asked, making a broad gesture covering the entire gallery. What do you think? I think it's perfect, he replied, walking slowly toward her. Just like you. Patricia rolled her eyes, but she smiled. Throughout these months, she'd seen all sides of Cameron. Businessman, patient, lover, friend. She'd seen his strengths and weaknesses, his business genius, and complete helplessness in simple everyday activities. And he'd learned to know her, too. Her stubbornness, ambition, sometimes excessive idealism, but also practicality and the ability to find joy in little things. It hadn't been easy. Their worlds were indeed different. They'd had to learn compromises, understanding, patience. Patricia had to get used to being in the spotlight when they appeared in public, to whispers and glances. Cameron had to accept that there were things his money couldn't buy, like respect from her family or acceptance from her friends. But every day they discovered that what united them was stronger than their differences, that their values of integrity, loyalty, and courage were the same, regardless of bank accounts or addresses. How's your checkup? Patricia asked, pouring him tea she'd prepared in a small back room of the gallery. No changes, Cameron replied, sitting in a chair by the counter. Neither better nor worse. Dr. Anderson says that's a good sign. Stabilization. Patricia nodded. She'd already learned that no changes in their situation was good. News that every day without getting worse was a small victory. And the company? She asked, sitting beside him. New contract with the Department of Health signed. Cameron smiled. But honestly, I'm less and less excited about it. Martha and the management team are doing great. I think I can afford more life now. Life? Patricia raised her eyebrows. What do you mean? Cameron put down his cup and looked straight into her eyes. I want to show you something, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He took out a small box and placed it on the counter between them. Patricia looked at the box, then at him. Her eyes widened with understanding. Cameron, before you say anything, he interrupted gently. I want you to know this isn't a proposal born of pity or fear of loneliness. This isn't a business transaction or an attempt to buy happiness. This is just a request from a man who found love when he least expected it. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant sapphire. Ring in the color of Patricia's eyes. I don't know how much time I have ahead of me, Cameron continued, but I know I want to spend every second with you. Not as CEO and waitress, not as patient and caregiver. Simply as Cameron and Patricia, who happened to find each other among millions of people in this city. Patricia felt tears come to her eyes. For a moment, she thought about all the difficulties they'd already gone through and which still awaited them, about the limitations his illness imposed, about the challenges related to his social position, about comments from people who would always say she was with him for the money. But then she looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had caught her attention at Under the Maples restaurant 6 months ago, the eyes of a man who, despite success, wealth, and disease, still sought the same thing she did, an authentic bond, understanding, love without conditions. Yes, she said simply, without hesitation. Yes, Cameron. When he slipped the ring on her finger and then kissed her gently, Patricia thought about all the coincidences that had brought them to this point. About a dropped fork, about a spontaneous gesture of help, about a Saturday walk around Chicago, about the courage to admit fear, about honesty in revealing truth, about readiness to overcome differences. Life sometimes has a strange sense of humor, she thought, repeating words she'd once told Cameron. She'd never assumed that waiting tables at Under the Maples would lead her to this moment, to her own art gallery, and engagement to a man who saw something more in her than everyone else had. "What are you thinking about?" Cameron asked, seeing her thoughtful face. "About us," she replied with a smile. "About how unbelievable our story is. Disabled billionaire and kind waitress. Sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. Or like the beginning of a beautiful story," Cameron finished, hugging her. Outside the gallery window, Chicago's autumn was slowly giving way to winter, but inside it was warm, from the colors of American folk art, and from the feelings that connected these two people from such different worlds, and yet perfectly matching each other, like two parts of the same whole that happened to be in the same place, at the same time, ready to start a journey through life together, no matter what tomorrow would bring. The end. If this story touched your heart, remember, true kindness is never wasted. One simple act of compassion, helping someone cut their food, offering a smile to a stranger, seeing the human behind the title, can change everything. Share this with someone who needs to know that love transcends wealth, status, and every physical limitation. That the universe rewards authentic connection. That sometimes the person who needs help the most is the one who seems to have everything. Subscribe if you believe in second chances, in love that sees beyond wheelchairs and bank accounts, in the power of treating everyone with dignity and kindness. Because sometimes a dropped fork isn't just clumsiness, it's destiny, creating an opportunity for two lonely souls to find each other and prove that the most valuable things in life can never be bought.